about something that's very important, something that is very critical to not only St. Clair County, not only the town, not only Lake Huron, but to the entire Great Lakes Basin. I wanted to use this opportunity to give you an update on the work that we've done since we announced our plan regarding the permanent nuclear waste dump in Kincardin, Ontario. It was back in June that we held a press conference underneath the Blue Water Bridge outlining our game plan to put a halt to a permanent nuclear waste facility within a mile of the shores of Lake Huron. Previous months included a whole lot of research on behalf of the Senate, of the Michigan Senate. We put together a team of researchers and a group of people that had over 25 years of expertise in environmental policy in Michigan. And during that time, we learned a lot. And I want to highlight you real quickly what we learned about Michigan and how Michigan is dealing with nuclear waste. And it was back in the 1990s, nearly 20 years ago, that Michigan took a very comprehensive approach to study what we're going to do with our low and intermediate level radioactive waste in this state. And it was concluded at that time that Michigan was not suitable for any permanent nuclear waste disposal. And we stand by that. So the first piece of legislation that I started working on was developing not only an acknowledgement of that permanent ban, but also going beyond and expanded that ban to Class C radioactive waste. So we put that legislation together. And within that legislation, Senate Bill 948 was also a provision to establish a nuclear commission to set up and monitor the effects of Senate Bill 958 that would be put together by appointments from the Michigan House, from the Michigan Senate, and the governor. And that's all detailed in Senate Bill 948. The other four pieces of legislation that we put together were in a form of a resolution. And the resolution was probably the strongest resolution that we could put together. And the key to this resolution was the fact that we were asking the International Joint Commission to weigh in on this issue, this dispute on the Great Lakes. And so that resolution was part of our approach, not only in the Senate, but in the House of Representatives as well. We put together 4 or 5 local state legislators to carry this legislative package not only through the Senate, but through the House. And so on the last day of session in June, the Senate unanimously passed Senate Bill 948, 38 to nothing. And the 4 resolutions also passed unanimously. I talked about the one resolution that engages the International Joint Commission, and through our research we discovered that in 1909 the United States and Canada signed a Boundaries Water Treaty. And people, as we were going down this road, one of the things we struggled with was how can we pass legislation in Michigan that would affect Ontario? And so we kept on asking ourselves, how can we do this? Well, through our research, we determined that there's a mechanism within the Boundary Waters Treaty of 1909 that the founders and the framers clearly understood that at some point there's going to be disputes among the Great Lakes states in the basin on how we're going to deal with the protection and the long-term stability of our lakes. So the International Joint Commission was formed, and it's got a track record of getting involved in a lot of disputes over 100 years. The other resolution that we thought was important because we've been working on it in the Michigan legislature, and that is engaging the Great Lakes Commission. And the Great Lakes Commission is another body, a strong policy body, that has been very helpful and are all in on this proposal to study this issue as well. And the Great Lakes Commission is built on the 8 Great Lakes states and the 2 provinces. Part of our approach was obviously we just can't deal with this in Michigan. We can set the example. We can be the standard bearer in the Great Lakes Basin in terms of how we're going to treat the nuclear waste permanently. But we also thought that it was important to engage the other 7 states. New York, Pennsylvania, Ohio, Indiana, Illinois, Wisconsin, Minnesota. And so part of our strategy in encouraging the other basin states was to encourage their legislatures to follow the lead of Michigan and put a flag in the ground and say, this isn't the spot in the Great Lakes Basin. The sensitivity is too great, and want them to join us. Now, many of these legislation, they're in part-time. And so hopefully when they come back in the fall, that they'll be encouraged enough to see, number one, the momentum that we're getting in Michigan, but also the importance. Because if you follow Great Lakes issues, you'll know that in 2008, the Great Lakes Commission came together unanimously and approved a basin-wide water withdrawal and discharge compact. So if we can all get together and be on the same page in terms of how we're going to be taking water out of the Great Lakes Basin, I think that a permanent nuclear waste repository should rise to the very same level. And that's why we're encouraging our other states to follow Michigan's lead. And so where we are in the process is all of those bills and resolutions are over in the House of Representatives. And at this point, I want to introduce Representative Paul Muxlow, who's working the effort along with Representative Andrew LaFontaine and Representative Dan Lauer in working the House side of this equation. And Paul, would you like to come up and say a few words?
Thank you. I appreciate all the folks that have turned out tonight. I particularly want to thank Phil and the Senate and the people that have worked hard and our friends across the water to try to eliminate this problem really before it happens. When I see things like this, I don't look so much about myself. I think about my grandkids and the impact that it can have down the road. And to say somewhere along the way, you can manage it for some period of time and then abandon it scares the tar out of me. I've got young grandkids, and that's all I can consider in a situation like this. And reading some example where they thought there might be a lifetime of security with waste, to find out that it began to leak in 10 and 15 and 20 years. What's the excuse once it happens? So we really need to put forth that effort now. And when these resolutions, when I get back to Lansing, we will be working hard to push those through and get them passed and try to get some pressure on our president. Thank you.
As we started down the road with our legislative package, it became very apparent that many groups statewide that are concerned about the environment, that are concerned about the great outdoors, immediately came on board. And it's with their support that it's given us the momentum to get to where we are today. They have access to many of their members, and we have a few of those representatives here today. And I'd like to call up our special guest. We have Mark Smith, and he's the Senior Policy Manager from the National Wildlife Federation. Mark, would you like to come up and say a few words on behalf of your organization and explain to our guests tonight where you came from, and a minute or so is fine.
Sure, no problem. Well, thank you, Senator, and welcome everyone. This is a real simple issue for National Wildlife Federation. We have a Great Lakes office just down the road in Ann Arbor, and our whole office is focused on protecting our Great Lakes. And when you tell me that we want to build a nuclear waste facility on the shores of Lake Huron, it's just dumb. You don't need to even think. I'm sorry, I said that twice earlier. I got the Ontario thing, I'm sorry. Huron.
This is Port
Huron. Right, so when you tell me you're going to build a facility there, it's just not a good idea. We can't even bury nuclear waste in the middle of the desert in Nevada. We want to change and move that to here? No, we're 20% of North America's fresh water right here. 95% the fresh water in North America is here. If you dump out all the Great Lakes across all North America, fill the Grand Canyon and still have 9 feet of water. This is a precious resource, not only for our hunting and fishing interests, but for our economy. So, bad idea. Not a good idea. The Senator mentioned the Great Lakes Compact. 1998, Ontario approved a permit to have Great Lakes water put on tankers and shipped to China for fresh water without any say in the United States. Caused an uproar. And as a result, now we have a prohibition on diversions of water that need every governor of Great Lakes State and the two Canadian provinces to say yes or no. Same thing should happen here. We have a resource here that we need to protect, and I really appreciate the Senator's efforts on this. And it's just simple, straightforward. It's a dumb idea. We don't need to have it here. are actually too important for us. So I really want to appreciate the Senator for all his work he's doing on this, and we're going to work together as we move forward with this.
Next, I'd like to call up Matt Evans. Matt is the Legislative Affairs Manager for the Michigan United Conservation Clubs. And Matt has put his time and effort into this, and he has come from Lansing tonight, or Grand Rapids, I forget now. But thank you for being here, Matt.
Thank you, Senator, for having me. Like you said, I'm the Legislative Affairs Manager for MUCC, and we represent about 43,000 folks from around the state that all feel pretty much like what Mark said. This is a pretty dumb idea. At first glance, when someone tells you about it, you think it sounds crazy. You read into it, and it still sounds crazy. At a time when talking about water is becoming more and more prominent on the national stage with all the droughts and things like that, Michigan is doing a great job leading the way with the water conservation work groups and the Office of the Great Lakes coming up with comprehensive water streams for the entire state of Michigan. And so it's only fitting that Michigan also leads the way on this issue. So MUCC, we fully support these resolutions, and so do all our members. We look forward to working with them and hoping to get these passed in time and manner.
We also have with us Gene Doss, and Gene Doss is here on behalf of the Michigan Environmental Council and James Cliff. Gene came from Lansing today and is very interested to see how this issue is playing out locally in Port Huron. So thank you for taking that opportunity. And if any of you are associated with environmental issues in the state, you know who the Michigan Environmental Council is. We've also garnered the support of the League of Conservation Voters. I could sit up here and give you a list of all of the groups statewide that have come and put their support and put their organizations behind this effort. And so you being here is just another indication of the sensitivity of this issue, as well as the power in using and leveraging our voices in this conversation. We're going to have an opportunity to hear from one of the leading warriors on this issue from Ontario. And I'll grab the bio, because I didn't print it out this morning. But we have with us Beverly Fernandez. And Beverly is the founding member and spokesperson for Stop the Great Lakes Nuclear Dump Incorporated. It's a non-profit citizens group based in Ontario, Canada. Beverly holds a Bachelor's of Arts degree in psychology from York University. She worked as a human resource manager during her career, including working for 12 years at York University. Beverly's volunteer resume includes working with children with disabilities, students in primary school, the Canadian Cancer Society, and an organization that built and supported a school for children in Afghanistan. She and her husband Frank have raised 2 sons who are both currently in university. Beverly has never been an activist until the seriousness of this issue compelled her to take action. So would you please give us a warm welcome for Beverly Fernandez.
Good evening, and thank you for coming in. Thank you, Senator Pavlov, for arranging this event. You're probably wondering how it is that I'm a featured speaker at this town hall when the word nuclear does not appear in my qualifications. Other than the fact that I have spent 7 days a week, every possible waking hour, and more sleepless nights than I can count for over 2 years now, researching, reading, writing newspaper articles, presentations, thousands of emails, assisting with complex papers, getting into website design, fundraising, speaking with politicians, radio show hosts, and journalists, and convincing them that they must care and that they must speak, write, and act about this issue. It dawned on me that I really know my stuff. I am here today, as Senator Pavlov mentioned, as spokesperson for Stop the Great Lakes Nuclear Dump, or we call it STIGLID for short, so you just have to get used to that. It's not a very good acronym, but we are a non-profit citizens group based in Ontario, Canada, that formed about a year and a half ago. We are deeply concerned that Ontario Power Generation, or the other acronym for the night, OPG, wants to build a deep geological repository, or DGR, to bury radioactive nuclear waste less than 1 mile from the shore of Lake Huron. When we learned of this plan, we decided something had to be done. We formed Stigland to raise public awareness and engage Canadians and, importantly, Americans to take an informed stand to oppose OPG's plan. It is important that we understand the profound importance, absolute necessity, and sanctity of water. Fresh drinkable water is required for life on this planet. Without it, life cannot exist. Water is life. It is that simple. The availability of fresh water has been decreasing in recent years. In some countries of the world, people die every day simply because they do not have clean water to drink. Water is the most important and most precious natural resource. Without it, we will perish. The clean waters of the Great Lakes are North America's greatest asset. They are an irreplaceable treasure. Enter Ontario Power Generation. OPG wants to bury the most toxic, lethal, dangerous, and long-lasting poisonous material that humans have ever created right beside the life-giving waters of the Great Lakes. OPG wants to bury radioactive nuclear waste that remains radioactive for 100,000 years right beside our Great Lakes. And they cannot and will not provide any guarantee that this nuclear waste will not leak and contaminate the Great Lakes. Let me give you a bit of background information on OPG's plans for the DGR so that you can understand what they are proposing to do. So if you take a look at the screen here, OPG is planning to drill and blast down to a depth of 2,230 feet underground to create tunnels into which they will place radioactive waste. They call this a Deep Geological Repository, or DGR for short. In essence, it is a mine, and it is huge. A single tunnel is the length of 2 football fields and is about the height and width of a 2-story house. There are 31 of these underground tunnels, and in looking at the slide, you can see how deep they are underground, and if you look at the top of the slide, you can see how close they are to the waters of Lake Huron. The tunnels will hold 7 million cubic feet of nuclear waste in 53,000 containers. The DGR will be 37 acres above the ground and 74 acres below the ground. The location of the DGR will be on the Bruce Nuclear Power Plant site. This is the largest operating nuclear plant in the world. The nuclear waste dump is planned to be built less than a mile from the shore of Lake Huron in the municipality of Kincardin, Ontario. So if you see on the slide here, that is an aerial view of the Bruce Nuclear Power Plant site, and the red area is the proposed nuclear waste dump. This location is about 120 miles upstream from Port Huron. So again, if you look at the screen briefly, you will see all of the Great Lakes. You'll see the red dot for the proposed nuclear waste dump, and Port Huron is just to the south of that on Lake Huron. Now, OPG plans to bury all of Ontario's low and intermediate level nuclear waste from Pickering, Darlington, and Bruce nuclear generating stations in the DGR. Low-level waste includes contaminated mops, rags, and tools, and intermediate-level nuclear waste includes resins, filters, and irradiated components from within the nuclear reactors themselves. Intermediate-level nuclear wastes are highly radioactive, and many remain radioactive for over 100,000 years. And as if this isn't bad enough, OPG intends to double the size of the DGR so they can bury decommissioning waste in it as well. Decommissioning waste is basically the entire nuclear plant, excluding the nuclear spent fuel, after it has been mothballed and dismantled at the end of its life. Once the DGR is filled, it will be monitored for 300 years, and then it will be abandoned. 300 years might sound like a long time. However, when you realize that some of the nuclear waste will be buried in the DGR remains lethal and dangerous for over 100,000 years, 300 years is not very long at all. If this DGR leaks into the Great Lakes, after it is abandoned, future generations will have no way of knowing until it's too late. Let's talk about the approval process. It's a rather long and complicated process. In a nutshell, a 3-person joint review panel has been established to review OPG's application to construct the DGR. The joint review panel held public hearings last fall and are again holding public hearings beginning on September 9th of this year. The upcoming hearings will be in Kincardin, Ontario. Once the joint review panel completes the reopened hearings, within 90 days they must write a report and make recommendations to the Canadian Federal Minister of the Environment, who will then take it to the federal cabinet to render its decision. The Canadian government's decision is anticipated to occur sometime in the spring of 2015. Now that you have some background information about OPG's plan and the approval process, I'd like to talk about the many reasons to be alarmed about OPG's plan. Number 1, site selection. OPG did not consider any other sites for the location of this nuclear waste dump. Can you imagine that in an environmental impact statement document that contains 3,432 pages, OPG devotes the equivalent of 1 single page to this issue? And what is more incredible is that their comment on achievability and acceptability of an alternative site option, unknown. Stigland and many others view this to be a shocking admission. OPG failed to perform the most basic alternate site alternative due diligence. The siting of a garbage dump in Canada requires that numerous sites be considered and that the most suitable site be chosen. Yet OPG determined it was okay to present a single site beside North America's greatest freshwater supply without investigating any other options. What we have learned is that the municipality of Kincardin approached OPG to offer up its community as the location for the nuclear waste facility, and OPG said, great. OPG felt they had a willing community, and so they decided they didn't need to look any further. Now, if you look at the map that we provided here, you will see that Ontario is a vast province. OPG is owned by the Ontario government. You might be interested to know that 87% of Ontario's land mass is owned by the Ontario government. Now, out of 354,000 square miles, OPG decided to put this dump less than a mile from Lake Huron. Why did OPG not consider alternative sites on available Ontario government-owned land? Why did they not consider alternative locations that are located far from people and far from the drinking water of 40 million people? Why didn't they investigate a site located in the vast area of the Canadian Shield? OPG and the Ontario government have no answers to these important questions. In our view, the failure to consider any other sites is a fatal flaw and should be sufficient reason for the Joint Review Panel and the Canadian federal government to reject OPG's plan. Number 2, lack of public consultation. OPG has a legal responsibility to engage the public in a meaningful way about its plan. Now, meaningful public participation means ensuring that citizens and governments and environmental groups are notified well in advance so that they have time to properly investigate and provide comments on the matter. Letting people know about this issue at the 11th hour does not constitute meaningful public consultation. I have to confess that although I live about 20 miles from this site, I only learned of this plan 2 summers ago. A are still largely unaware of this plan. How is this possible? With billions of dollars at its disposal, you would think that OPG could design an effective communications program, one that would reach the 40 million people that would be affected by their plan. What has actually happened is that OPG's communication effort has been limited and focused primarily on the local communities. Not surprisingly, many of the people in the communities are OPG, Nuclear Waste Management Organization, or Bruce Power employees and retirees. And they receive a salary and a pension from the nuclear industry. They are clearly in a conflict of interest position. OPG also contacted elected officials in Kincardin and adjacent communities. And you should know that these same communities are receiving millions of dollars, 36 million to be exact, from OPG under a hosting agreement that requires them to express their support for OPG's DGR in exchange for these financial payments. Under this agreement, it clearly states that if the communities fail to show their support for the DGR, these payments could be cut off. These communities are conflicted because they are being paid to show their support. In our view, this is completely inappropriate. But what about the 40 million people who rely on the Great Lakes for their drinking water? OPG engaged in some very minimal discussions in Michigan, but certainly the people of Michigan were not consulted. And what about the citizens of New York, Ohio, Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, Illinois, Minnesota, and Indiana? And in Canada, what about Quebec and other communities in Ontario outside of Bruce County? All were not consulted. Essentially, very few outside of Bruce County were consulted. As we all know, the Great Lakes are all interconnected. Clearly, all of the Great Lakes provinces and states would be concerned about any proposal that may threaten their drinking water. Of course, if you don't contact these communities and tell them about the proposal, they won't know anything about it, and they won't have an opportunity to provide their views. Number 3, toxicity and longevity of the waste. As mentioned earlier, the proposed DGR will entomb low and intermediate level nuclear waste. While the low-level waste remains dangerous for about 300 years, some of the intermediate level nuclear waste remains radioactive, toxic, and lethal for 100,000 years. To put this into perspective, the Great Lakes themselves are only about 12,000 years old. Intermediate level nuclear waste is almost as toxic and radioactive as nuclear fuel. Now let's talk briefly about geology. OPG is planning to construct this dump in limestone. I'm not a geologist, but I do know that a deep geological repository in limestone is unproven and unprecedented anywhere in the world. Here's what the late Dr. William Fife had to say about this. And by the way, Dr. Fife is a geologist and Professor Emeritus in the Department of Earth Sciences at the University of Western Ontario. He was widely considered amongst the world's most eminent geochemists and an international consultant on nuclear waste. And he says, and I quote, "You do not put nuclear waste near things like the Great Lakes or the Great Rivers in case there's a leakage that you haven't expected." End quote. The fact of the matter is that no scientist or geologist, including OPG's scientists or geologists, can guarantee that this nuclear waste dump will not leak. OPG cannot and will not provide any such guarantee. Number 5, and this is one of the most concerning. Other nuclear waste dumps are leaking, despite assurances this would never happen. Let me tell you about Maxey Flats, Kentucky. To be clear, Maxey Flats is not a deep geological repository, but it is a nuclear waste dump to hold low-level nuclear waste. What is important about Maxey Flats is the They were told that the possibility of off-site migration of the waste was, quote, essentially non-existent, end quote. Citizens were told it would take 24,000 years for the plutonium to travel 1/2 of an inch. Less than 10 years later, the plutonium was found 2 miles off-site. Let me tell you about OSA 2 in Germany. This is a deep geological repository. It was intended to permanently house low and intermediate level nuclear waste underground in a salt mine, supposedly in a completely dry and non-corrosive environment. Under a strict approval process, the government and scientists provided assurances once again to the people that this deep geological repository would not leak. 10 years later, 3,170 gallons of water per day started leaking into this DGR. They had no idea where the water was coming from or how to stop it. The groundwater is contaminated. The scientists were dead wrong. OSA 2 is an unmitigated disaster to this day. Their plan now is to try to remove the nuclear waste at a cost estimated at about $15 billion. However, this may not in fact be possible because the DGR is in danger of collapse. And now, closer to home, let me tell you about the DGR in Carlsbad, New Mexico. And it is called the Waste Isolation Pilot Plant, or WIPP for short. WIPP is the only operating DGR on the entire planet. It is basically the very same depth as the planned DGR in Kincardin. WIPP is in a salt mine. It is used to hold nuclear waste from the U.S. Defense Program. Once again, the scientists and assured the public that WIPP would never leak. OPG held up WIPP as a shining example of a DGR with a successful track record. WIPP formed a very important part of the safety case for the planned Kincardin DGR that OPG presented to the review panel. Citizens were assured that WIPP would contain its nuclear waste forever. A mere 15 years into its operation, on February 14th of this year, WIPP leaked underground. The radioactive contaminants reached right up to the surface and into the air. In total, 22 workers received internal radiation contamination, and the radioactive contaminants reached the next town. WIPP is currently closed down. They still don't know what caused the leak. Now, there is not a single DGR holding lethal nuclear waste on our planet that has not leaked. So as you can see, there are many compelling reasons to be alarmed about OPG's plan. Site selection, lack of public consultation, toxicity and longevity of the waste, geology, and other nuclear waste dumps are leaking. Burying radioactive nuclear waste less than a mile from the shore of one of the Great Lakes, the largest source of fresh water in the world, and the supply of drinking water for 40 million people in 2 countries defies common sense. Put simply, would you bury poison beside your well? This is why we feel it is so important that the public learn about this plan so they can take an informed stand and voice their opposition. And I will tell you, opposition is growing every day. Many organizations and citizens groups are opposing this plan through the environmental assessment process. North American physicians organizations are opposing OPG's plan. The American Academy of Environmental Medicine, a respected organization of physicians and scientists, has indicated, quote, the American Academy of Environmental Medicine board is unanimously opposed to the deep geological repository on the Great Lakes, as it poses a serious threat to the health of the public and the environment, end quote. In Canada, the Canadian Association of Physicians for the Environment indicate, quote, "Our organization is deeply concerned about the potential risks associated with burying highly radioactive material in close proximity to North America's largest freshwater resource. With radioactive isotopes to be buried in the repository remaining extremely hazardous for hundreds of thousands of years, any possibility of a release into the biosphere represents an unacceptable threat and risk to human health and the environment." End quote. Stop the Great Lakes Nuclear Dump has been very active in raising awareness about this issue with local governments all around the Great Lakes, in both Canada and the U.S. And I have to say that Senator Pavlov in Michigan has been a leader in this way. And many of the communities are standing up and voicing their concern and opposition by passing resolutions. So if you take a look at our resolution map, you will see by the red dots all the communities that are passing resolutions opposing the dump. So far, over 65 resolutions have been passed in various Canadian and U.S. communities, including the city of Port Huron and across the border in Sarnia. The population of communities represented by these resolutions is over 10.5 million people. To date, 28 resolutions have been passed in Michigan alone, including 2 resolutions recently adopted by the Michigan Senate, thanks to the efforts of Senator Pavlov. Many more resolutions are expected to follow. Almost 65,000 citizens have signed the Stop the Great Lakes Nuclear Dump petition so far. And this includes citizens from every province and territory in Canada and all 50 U.S. states. There is broad opposition to this plan. Let me tell you who is signing the petition. We have prominent and distinguished Canadians, companions, officers, and members of the Order of Canada, which is Canada's highest civilian order, on it. We have doctors, scientists, geologists, professors, lawyers, teachers, artists, authors, First Nations, chiefs and peoples, members of Canada's armed forces, Canadian and U.S. politicians, and everyday people like you and I. Our petitioners include over 1,100 doctors, some of the most learned and well-respected members of our society. Dr. David Suzuki is a name some of you may be familiar with. He is one of Canada's most famous Canadians and a world-renowned scientist and environmentalist. He has signed our petition. And more than that, he recently wrote an article that is being widely syndicated and appeared in over 100 publications. Dr. Suzuki is calling for the Kincardin Nuclear Waste Dump to be stopped. Here in Michigan, over 11,000 citizens have signed our petition. Senator Pavlov, Senator Hopgood, Representative Roberts, and Representative Brown have also signed our petition. Many people, organizations, and governments are speaking out and saying no to OPG's plan. So where do we go from here? We encourage everyone to learn as much as you can about this issue. Visit our website at www.stopthegreatlakesnucleardump.com. Pick up the handouts at the front, just outside the room here. If you have decided that you want to voice your concern and opposition, then please consider signing our petition. It will go to the Canadian Federal Minister of the Environment, and you can do this by visiting our website. We would also encourage you to sign Senator Pavlov's petition for Lake Huron. Senator Pavlov's petition will go to President Barack Obama. Finally, it is very important that you tell others what you have learned tonight. And please encourage friends, family, and fellow workers to sign our petition. Do whatever you can to spread awareness of this ill-conceived idea. Do whatever you can to help stop it. Work with your elected officials and environmental organizations. Write to your local newspapers. You can make a difference. In the words of Margaret Mead, quote, "Never doubt that a small group of thoughtful, committed citizens can change the world. Indeed, it is the only thing that ever has." End quote. I would like to conclude with a quote from one of our petitioners. It comes from the late Farley Mowat, one of Canada's most famous authors, an environmentalist, and an officer of the Order of Canada. Quote, "This plan for the disposal of nuclear waste smacks of a scenario from a mad hacker. That it is apparently the fantasy of governmental agencies is bloody terrifying to any person possessing a scrap of sanity. I believe I am reasonably sane. I believe this plan is errant madness, and I will resist it with every ounce of determination in me. End quote. I urge everyone here today to resist this plan with conviction and with strong determination. It is imperative to take a stand as Americans and as Canadians for both of our countries, for the irreplaceable, precious waters of the Great Lakes that we share, for the sake of your drinking water, for the sake of your fellow citizens, for your family, for your children, your grandchildren, and for the future of the thousands of generations to come. Thank you.
Very well done, Beverly, and we really appreciate you bringing your expertise and the time that you've been associated with this issue to our community. I just want to hit a couple points that I didn't cover in my opening remarks. Beverly put a map on there to show you the communities that have gone forward at the local level to embrace the resolutions. And I was just in Lexington last night where they passed the resolution as well. The city of Port Huron did it, Lake Township, the city of Lapeer, Sealing Township, Carsonville, Roswell, Sand Lake County Board, the Tuscola Board, Peck and Paris Township. And we have them pending on the agenda for the next couple of weeks for Bay County, Bad Axe, Millington. And so my partner in the Michigan Senate on this issue is Senator Mike Green, who represents the Northern Thumb area. So he's been working, and so has Representative LaFontaine in Macomb County, to get us that kind of acknowledgement that we need at the grassroots level. When we put our communities and our elected people locally on this issue, it becomes much more important. And with that, at the top of my list, I noticed that Port Huron was on that list. And for those of you who might not have heard, our former mayor of Port Huron, Brian Moeller, passed away today. Brian was probably the strongest advocate for the city of Port Huron and its success going forward. Brian also was currently serving as a councilman. And if we could all stand and have a moment of silence in memory of Brian Moeller's family. Thank you, appreciate that. One of the other points that I want to make before we turn it over to questions, and Beverly has graciously agreed to stick around for a little bit, try to answer some of your questions and concerns. Beverly talked about the joint review panel that's going to begin again on September 9th in Kincardin. I have applied and sent in my testimony on what I would like to speak to that commission about. If you received a packet, my written remarks are in that packet. We had to submit them to be approved, and I don't know if we've heard back yet if we've been approved to go over there and talk about it. But the important thing is, in the way that we're going to frame our conversation to this joint commission is very important, and it's laid out. I won't go through and read it out. But the 4 premises that I just want to touch on because they are important, and it's the first one. All power of government is vested in the people, and you guys literally are the people that are giving us that kind of tailwind that we need as we take this fight to the next step in Ontario. So look that over. Also in your packet, you'll see this half sheet. On it, it has the website for protectlakehuron.com. There you can sign the online petition, and then we will also forward those petitions on to our congressional delegation, and it appears that we've got the full support of not only Senator Levin and Senator Stabenow. Certainly, Congresswoman Miller has been a leading advocate in pushing at the federal level on this issue. So this is an issue that I think has broad support. You guys are certainly lending your personal touch to it, And that's really how we're going to be successful, when we can fill rooms like this and advocate for things in the future. So it's greatly appreciated. And Beverly, we got time for a couple questions, perhaps something that's on your mind. We've got staff in the office, or from the office, if you just want to raise your hand if you have any questions you'd like to ask Beverly while she's here. Certainly happy to entertain them.
Chief, you mentioned a three-person joint review panel. Who's on that? Who's on that?
They are 3 people that have been chosen by the Canadian Nuclear Safety Commission. Stella Swanson is one. I cannot remember the names of the other 2. One is a professor from Queen's University, and I cannot remember the third person's name and position. But I can certainly get that information to you.
The Safety Commission appointed these people or something?
Yes, the Canadian Nuclear Safety Commission appointed them. Yes?
I believe that one in New Mexico was because of kitty litter, that leak. That's what they found out. They changed the brand of kitty litter, and that's what caused the leak. How are you received by your government officials? As well here, that's the interesting part.
Right. I'll just address the first part of your question. Kitty litter was thought to be the reason for the leak in WIP, and they did some experiments to try to replicate that because they had changed it to an organic kitty litter, but they were unable to replicate the explosion. So my understanding is that at this point, they still don't know exactly what caused that leak. It's still under investigation. As to how we are received by the government in Canada, we approached an MP I'm in Bruce County, and as I explained, that was the area that OPG largely consulted, and a lot of the people work at the nuclear power plant and other nuclear organizations there. We were not well received from our local MP, and in fact, he told me to go home and worry about something else.
So more or less you're saying that they're not as concerned as we are?
I have to say that as a Canadian, I have been very disappointed in the amount of political engagement in Canada on this issue. We are very thankful for the strong political engagement of the politicians in Michigan. We do have a mayor in Canada, Mayor Mike Bradley from Sarnia, who has been speaking out about this issue consistently from the beginning. But that is, plus we do have the resolutions that are coming forward from major cities in Canada, like Toronto, Oakville, Mississauga, Brampton, really major centers. But there has not as yet been enough political uptake in Canada.
Do you find a major issue is the fact that, unlike the United States, the Canadian government owns the business? So to be like having Ford or GM be in charge of our highway regulation system.
It no doubt complicates the issue because OPG is owned by the province of Ontario. Yes, and that does complicate it as if it were something completely removed from the province. Yes, it does complicate the issue. Yes.
Yeah. I'd like to know about the resolution process. Is there some kind of format that I can find online to bring in front of my city commission?
Yes. From our perspective, you go to our website, there is a resolution page. There is information and sample resolutions that can be passed. I would suggest perhaps if you speak with Senator Pavlov might be a very good way to start because he has been quite instrumental in getting a lot of resolutions passed. Did you have anything to add?
Yeah, if you take a look, this got our office contact information, and so between Senator Green and myself, we have distributed some form language that's consistent with the work that we've been doing in the Senate that drives toward the IJC and the Great Lakes Commission. So our information is on this little handout, and Laura would be happy to issue that by phone call or by email.
Thank you.
You were talking about the
Another option is to leave it where it is and monitor it closely. A second option is to re-encase the waste in hardened concrete casks, and these casks are bomb-proof. And again, the advantage of that is that it remains above ground, it can be monitored for leaks, and if leaks occur, they can be dealt with. Yes?
My question is, since OPG has so much money to throw around, and they've obviously sort of had a conspiracy going, keeping this quiet, it just makes me wonder if we can even be successful in stopping them.
When we first started out on this, to be honest, we are a very small group, and virtually nobody knew about this outside of Bruce County. And we've only been in existence now for a year and a half. So our attitude was, we had to do all that we could to stop it. And the momentum has been tremendous. I mean, we have Dr. David Suzuki behind us. We now have Michigan taking up the fight in a very big way. We have resolutions from all around the Great Lakes. My attitude is, I'm beginning to feel hopeful. We're in a David and Goliath situation here. But we all know who won that battle. So I think that we have to, there's no way that we can stop. And even if it gets approved, we can't stop them either. We have to keep going until it is stopped. Yes?
Will the spring 2015 decision that you brought up earlier be the end-all be-all decision of whether this will happen, this depository will happen?
That will be the approximate time frame that the Canadian federal government will make the decision. But as we all know, I'm sure that there are projects that have been stopped even once the government has made a decision. So we hope that the decision will be the correct decision, not to proceed with this nuclear waste dump and not to proceed with any nuclear waste dump anywhere in the Great Lakes Basin. That is what our petition speaks to, and that is what our belief is. And the reason for that is that if you put it anywhere in the Great Lakes Basin, all the rivers run right to the Great Lakes. There's no sense putting it 100 miles away, right under a river that then runs down. So we hope that that is the, and Michigan again has taken the lead in that, as Senator Pavlov indicated, in believing that there's nowhere in Michigan that's appropriate for a nuclear waste dump. Yes?
Can you speak to the incentive that OPG has for building this dump in such an environmentally sensitive area when, like you said, they have all of Ontario to choose a more likely spot for it? I'm just wondering if this is a dollar and cents type of thing, or is it just politics?
Both, I would gather. It's money, it's politics, it's that they believe they have a willing host community. And as we all know, it's to me kind of hard to fathom why a community would want to have this waste located in their town. So it's really a combination of that transportation. It's no doubt this is not an easy problem. Yes?
Is there any truth to the rumor that I heard that they might import more nuclear waste by freighter from other countries?
That is a possibility. Yes?
There's also the strong possibility that a high-level waste dump could be built in the Great Lakes Basin. And could you talk to that?
Yeah, that is an issue. It becomes very confusing when we just talk about low and intermediate level nuclear waste dump, but there is also a proposal in Ontario right now for a high-level nuclear waste dump, and that is a dump to contain radioactive spent fuel. So that is the most dangerous kind of radioactive waste. And currently in Ontario, there are 14 communities and one in Saskatchewan, I believe, that are still under consideration for that high-level nuclear waste dump. And many of them as well, very close around the Great Lakes, which is again why our petition states nowhere in the Great Lakes Basin. So that is a danger, and truth to tell, this Kincardin nuclear waste dump may in fact be a Trojan horse, because if ultimately they are not able to find a dump for the nuclear spent fuel, there is nothing to say that the hosting agreement cannot be changed so that all that nuclear spent fuel can be located less than a mile from the Great Lakes. Yes.
Was that extra, the second place we were just talking about, is that also owned by OPG?
That, we call them DGR1, which is Kincardin. DGR2 is in fact about 10 years or more further down the line. And I'm sorry, I forgot your question. I was trying to...
Is it still owned by OPG, the same?
The waste, that is all of Canada's nuclear waste. What is it? The Nuclear Waste Management Organization is the organization that has been set up to deal with that, and it is not just Ontario's, it's all of Canada's nuclear waste. Nuclear spent fuel. Yes.
Beverly, what's the designation of the Great Lakes Basin? How far north could you go before you were actually out of the Great Lakes Basin, or don't you get out of it?
No, you do, you definitely do.
So how far up do they
One
have
of
to
our
put it?
maps there had it, I forgot to mention that, it had it outlined in a green area. If you go on our website, you will see it there. And it varies in distance, you know, around the Great Lakes, and it does include, I believe, part of the Canadian Shield, the granite of the Canadian Shield, but you definitely, Ontario is a vast, massive province, and Canada is a very, very large country. So there definitely is lots of room outside of the Great Lakes Basin in the Canadian Shield, in the granite rock of the Canadian Shield.
Beverly, I was really surprised to learn that 58% of Canada's energy is nuclear. And I'm a little surprised by that. The United States is 18 to 20%, and we struggle with these same issues. So I'm just curious about, is there a growing interest in looking at the energy decisions that result in these kind of waste?
Of course, many environmental groups are definitely, trying to bring that agenda forward to the Canadian government, but we do have fairly high reliance, as you said, on nuclear. There certainly are lots of wind turbines in Ontario, and that is something that has been looked at and encouraged. There certainly are other natural forms of energy, but at the present, that's the way it is. Yes.
Yeah, and following on what this lady just said, there is no container that will contain this stuff for the extremely long reaches of time that it has to be contained, to isolate it from the biosphere. And so we really need to be looking at stopping making it. And Michigan makes also a whole lot of nuclear waste. Not only that, but every single nuclear power plant is a potential, if there was a Fukushima, Fermi 2 which is right down on Lake Huron, has got, it's a Mark 1 reactor, which is just like the Fukushima reactors, and all of the spent fuel which is kind of a misnomer, the irradiated fuel, is stored on top of the reactor, in a section on top of the reactor outside of the containment, and there is no way currently to unload that, and there is more stored there than was in Fukushima. And so we really need, I feel strongly, since there is no good thing to do with this, the containers that we're going to hold the low level and the intermediate level waste at the DGR, both of them are guaranteed for less than 100 years. And, I really think that we need to look at how we make our energy. So thank you.
And I will just point out that our organization, we are focusing on one thing and one thing only. We We recognize that it's here, we have it, and we have to deal with it responsibly. And what we are saying is burying it less than a mile from the Great Lakes, a source of drinking water for all of us, and 40 million more, defies common sense.
Thank you for your interest in this very important topic, and Beverly, Frank, thank you for your dedication to this, and thank you for coming over and sharing with our audience the things that you've learned along the way, and we appreciate it. Hopefully we'll both be successful in being able to speak to the Joint Commission in September. We can certainly leverage your voices in that conversation. If you didn't get a packet on the way in, please grab one on the way out, because that's how you can stay involved in the process, and that's how you can contact us with any further questions you might have. Thanks to our county chair, Jeff Bone is here. He gave us the building for tonight. Jeff, thank you for setting the room up. We appreciate that, and safe travels home to all our guests that came a long way. Thank you.